All right, we should be sharing now. Feel free throughout the webinar to add any questions to the Q&A session. There will also be a Q&A session at the end. So we will have time to ask any questions that the team might have as we go through this. But again, thank you for your time today. We'll be walking through the new Budget Clarity application that just launched on the ServiceNow store via Proven Optics. So really, the goal of the Budget Clarity application. You'll notice first and foremost, it's now in the native ServiceNow workspaces. The workspace is nice because it's a fresh look of the capability, but we also enhanced a lot of the budgeting capability with this release. So, traditionally in the legacy application and in budgets in general, right, managing on spreadsheets, um, they are admin heavy views, and its workflows often designed for your IT team, not for finance. And finance teams need visibility and control without needing ServiceNow experts on the line, right? Similarly, budgeting isn't necessarily a daily task. Some owners only budget annually, uh, coming in forecast monthly, right? And then an admin might be coming in and looking at your budget daily or weekly, but making that experience as simple as possible ultimately removes that complexity. So you're not slowing down reviews, you're not increasing any errors in your budget. And again, you're not relying on that ServiceNow team for finance specific tasks. So this new workspace is really your budget command center where you could log in and see how any budget that you have planned is currently operating. So everything you need from submission progress of your budget, if you're using the tool to actually formulate and create that budget, to burn down, understanding how much you have left at any given time. If this budget is something that you're in the year of executing and you're bringing in actuals, we'll go into the actual match confidence later in the demonstration. You can also stack rank and prioritize budget by team or by cost center to where I can see the status of any budget lines that have been submitted, funded, or approved, as well as the current variance that the team is tracking towards on any given budget line and the priority score. Again, we'll go more into how we're prioritizing and scoring budget lines for easy approval and prioritization later in the demonstration. And then from a review and approval process, clean widgets to keep you in the same interface, right? So keep you in the same stream of work here where I could actually click right in to any budget line, get more detail as needed, and actually open this record, add comments, and quickly mark approved, reviewed, funded, etc., all from the same interface, never having to really break that workflow in this screen that I'm on. So again, streamlining the navigation and the user experience all to this workspace is really one of the key benefits of the Budget Clarity application. Now, Budget Clarity is more than just that fresh look and feel. As I said, it also has a revamped workflow and revamped intelligence. So one example of that is the new workflow or extended workflow around funded and partially funded. We see this a lot specifically in the federal government, but also with things like purchase orders and purchase order requests in the enterprise market. Um, Typically, what this means is um, you might need that extra step, right, of that workflow. Just because you got a budget approved doesn't mean your funding the year of stayed the same, right? In federal market speak, it's called apportionment, right? Just because the appropriation was allocated to me and approved a year ago, it doesn't necessarily mean I get all of that funding at once, right? So how do I track items that I might need to partially fund throughout the year, right? And the system will now keep track of that. Similarly, from an enterprise perspective, you have budget approved, but typically you have to go through a purchase request process in order to actually go spend that money. That purchase request process might actually drive how much you can spend, right? If budget and priorities again shift mid-year, we have to be adaptive and we have to be able to pivot on the fly. A couple good examples of where we can use this partially funded idea to better use that workflow in the system and not track something externally in Notes or in Excel, right? And the system will keep track of what is partially funded and the amounts that are outstanding based on what was approved and what has been funded. So just a quick way and a quick win for teams to better extend the workflow and some of the processes that they're running within the platform. All right. That can also quickly be tracked on any of the lower navigation segments here. So the idea is to keep you as much out of the all navigator as possible and really bring the experience all in these workspaces, right? So going back to that funding example, if you ever need to check in on, hey, what was totally funded from the approval standpoint when we got our funding approved last year. What was actually requested against that funding? These are individuals going in and submitting budget requests or budget needs real time in the system, and we're being able to track what is being requested versus what has actually been distributed, meaning, hey, this has been funded or this has been approved to actually go spend. And then the ability to actually track that variance. How much funding do I have left at any given team level or fund level that I want to track? So we really have that nice hierarchy roll up of understanding how much we've been given from a ceiling perspective and how much has actually been requested and distributed throughout the budgeting process here on platform. Now, another piece before we get into some of the budget details is how do we quickly get you up and running on the application with historical data? Budget season often feels like deja vu, and finance teams spend weeks rebuilding what oftentimes already exists from prior years, copying over spreadsheets, taking different versions and consolidating those into master sheets. Really, the idea with the um, budget session view, and sorry, let me create a new session for you here so we can see what I'm talking about. Um, a start of a new session would actually allow you to take a baseline or a copy and paste, if you will, for any previous year budget to a future year budget. So typically what we do upon implementation is let me get this set up here. We would take your previous year's approved budget or 3 years of prior year approved budget, however much you need from an auditory perspective, right? And we would be able to copy and paste. Sorry, let's go here. Copy and paste any of that information over to a new year, right? So 2029, all of my mandatory fields here. See the governance working. There we go. You'll see this create baseline come up. Now, what this allows is you can essentially, like I said, copy and paste any budget session from a previous year and bring it into your current target, which is in this case the test we just stood up for 2029. You can also conditionally specify what you want to bring over, which is pretty cool. You can use any field of metadata to conditionally say, hey, for example, I only want to bring over the budget lines that were in the state of approved from last year, right? Or I only want to bring over my OpEx budget, for example, to start with, and then we can build out any new ads as necessary. You get the idea. You can essentially choose exactly what you want to copy and paste over. So it's making sure you're starting with the baseline that you actually care about. You can also, of course, choose here what states you want to bring over. So there's a status selector based on your workflow in the system. And then additional functionality here on the screen is you can actually choose what amount to bring over, right? If you wanted to bring over your approved and adjusted amounts, including things like your forecast for the year, you would be able to select what amount field and how you want to adjust it. Do I want to uplift this for something like inflation by 5%? Or do I want to reduce this because funding got slashed this year and I know that going into the year? So I want to try to start with a baseline that is bringing our APEX spend down by 3%, for example. And what that's going to do now when I save this and run it, it's going to take everything from the source that I chose and it's going to copy that over automatically, right? So that helps us start with a nice clean slate with the information we already know from the previous year. And then again, we can start to focus on the net new ads of things we don't know that are coming down the pipe for this budget season. So some automation there baked into the platform for you. Now, what's it look like for a budget owner, somebody actually entering these budget lines once that baseline's created, to actually come in and manage some of their work, right? So if I choose an example of a budget here, you can actually see your budget details that you've entered. You could, of course, create new budget line items. But if we drill into this, this is really the budget form. You'll notice that there's a nice heads-up dashboard display of the high-level information that might be important to you, including how much is this ask of the full percentage of budget? What do I have remaining? And how long has this been in its state if it's something that I'm actually currently trying to get approved, right? A couple key details here. One, financial dimensions. Our financial dimensions are essentially all of the columns that might be on a spreadsheet today that you're budgeting for that we can now bring in a clean way, reference other fields on platform, and ultimately build out what is that metadata, what's the context necessary to understand to go through and make sure this budget has enough information on it to get approved and also to answer the questions leadership might be asking from a reporting perspective. I can, of course, fill in what I'm requesting. A couple features here that are important around scoring and prioritization, like the dashboard you saw when I started the demo, is we actually now have that scoring engine that runs in the background. Now, out of the box, it's pretty simple. We have high, medium, low risk, we have one to end priority, and we have high, medium, low impact. You can also align this to strategy or what we call an expense driver to add additional scoring weighted scores here when you save the record. What you'll notice is each of these inputs is tied to a configurable weighted score. So when we set this up, you can actually choose what these values relate to from a scoring perspective, and that's how we're rolling the priority of each budget up when we consolidate that at the higher level view. It's really coming from this detailed need, in this case, my new ServiceNow services bill, right, or budget line that I'm including here, it gives the end user the opportunity to score that for leadership to better understand how critical this is to the business. And again, this scoring matrix is configurable in nature. How is this going to route through the workflow? This can be auto-populated based on the individual submitting the budget or who the budget owner is, but it also can just be selected for an individual or a group of approvers. Of course, the activities and changes will all be audited, right? So everything's logged. The amounts will be captured with what the amount was, what the amount is now. All of that information you no longer have to manually track, in some other spreadsheet. It's done systematically throughout the process. Budgets can also be spread throughout the year, so we can amortize any of the amounts that you're entering into the system. This also helps when it comes to that forecasting, which is really you're always forecasting best practice monthly, right? So you forecast against your monthly year-to-date amount, not necessarily your full year amount each month. So this is really how we can tie that forecast engine in when we get there in the demo. It's going against those monthly records. So this is how that's automated. You can actually just hit a spread button and this will happen automatically. And you'll also notice once we start executing on this budget, the actuals will come in neatly right in the same view. So you really have all of the information you might need at a glance. Some other high-level capabilities that we won't go into today, you can of course do adjustments and transfers. So if this is already approved, right, and I no longer can edit it, I have to go in and request an adjustment as an end user. That's what this capability does. It lets me adjust any information or amounts on a approved record that I no longer might be able to edit. A snapshot's a new functionality in the application. You can think of a snapshot as a point in time piece of information of how a budget might have evolved. So when you're setting up your budgets, you can actually set up points and times based on a schedule of when you want to create a snapshot. So maybe you have an initial snapshot that's done 3 months into your budget cycle, and you have another snapshot that's taken upon approval of your budget. It just helps you see how the budget changed throughout time, and it will actually preserve a carbon copy of the budget detail records in the platform for reporting purposes and for audit purposes. Transfers, great for end of year activity, right? Hey, we've identified we have a surplus of money in this account or in this budget line. I want to transfer it to a new priority that came down the pipe throughout the year and it needs to be funded. Or we have a high priority item that is burning hot and I need to transfer more money into it to make sure I don't overrun that account. This is that capability where I can send money to and fro accounts, and it will always show the winners and losers from an audit perspective, who lose money and who gained that money, so it's tracked. Other tie-ins to the platform, of course, again, we're native to platform, one data model. So things like project tracking against budgets, um, strategies that you might be tracking in SPM, applications or services in your CMDB that you're tracking, all of that information can be neatly associated to a budget line as well, again, to give it more context throughout its life cycle. All right, once we have budgets approved in the system, what happens next? Really, that is when the reconciliation process comes into play. So, in the system, we help automate that reconciliation process of bringing actuals in and matching them against budget lines. So, in the system, we have an actuals table. This table is almost always hydrated from a source of truth, your ERP, your contracts, any of your billing systems. Where are you tracking expenses today? That's essentially the information that we would help bring in to the platform to populate our actuals table. Now there's logic running in the background that'll actually help match those actuals to their respective budget line. Today, a big problem we see across the market with people doing this manually or organizations doing this on spreadsheets is you have a spreadsheet of your approved budget and you have a spreadsheet extract of your month-end close coming in from ERP. Somebody has to manually go through and match things like purchase order numbers, vendors, contract numbers, account numbers. You get the idea. Any of the metadata or patterns that they can glean from the budget versus the ERP to actually do that match to understand how much do I have left to spend, right? To do that variance reporting. In the tool, we have match logic that you can configure so you can essentially choose any fields that make a budget line unique to a execution or an actual coming in the system. We run that match once we have that parameter set up, and the system will tell you how much was matched automatically. In this example, we ran our actuals through that mechanism. 84% of the work, or 351 records, were matched automatically for me. This means I don't have to go through, I can of course go through and validate, but I don't have to go through and manually do that work. Unmatched, though, I have 66 left uh, actuals that didn't find a home. They didn't find a budget line to slot against. That's where I could actually manually come in and reference any budget detail that this actual might live or go against. So we can reference that table here. We could drill in and get more information on these budget lines, but this is where I could start to select and apply to do that reconciliation in the system. Once this is done, this amount from the expense is going to go against this budgeted amount, right? So again, helping automate that variance tracking for you in the system as best as possible, and then giving you actionable lists to go through and manually consolidate, in this case, the 66 records. Or hopefully, as we go forward, figure out how to mature this match logic if you start to see patterns in what's not matched, so it's automated for you in the future. All right, the last piece we'll go through is the forecasting logic here. So um, forecasting can happen in the tool. So once you have your budget amounts and your actuals coming in, which is the blue and the red lines that you're seeing here, you can actually have monthly users come back in to that budget owner workspace and inform their forecast, which is the purple line. In this example, you can see that our business is not very good at forecasting. That's okay. Maybe we don't have a mechanism to do that intelligently today. The idea here is bringing the data owner in who's closest to the money, who's closest to the spend, so that they can inform the future periods of what that spend is going to look like. So I can get out in front of any overruns and I can implement cost controls faster so that I don't have periods where I'm going way over budget or way over what I was forecasted to spend. The system out of the box has two automated forecast methodologies that will actually auto-populate the forecast amounts for an end user based on year-to-date actuals and remainder of budget, as well as bringing in adjustments. We can actually customize that formula if needed. If you run some different type of math to give you your forecasted amount for what that rolling forecast looks like, that's something that can be accounted for. But ultimately, we're just bringing individuals back into the system and asking them what's going to change going forward. And we have nice workspace views to accompany that capability. The other piece I didn't touch on, and I know we have 8 minutes left, and I want to leave time for questions, is labor planning. Entire revamped labor planning in the platform. So we can essentially account for internal, external uh, resources, as well as look at rates, salaries, or pay bands that can be set up to really populate your labor resource planning. And the great thing about the labor planning in the tool is it's completely integrated to the broader budget process. So once you set up these labor resources, you essentially would just go ahead and associate them to any budget line. That actually also auto-populates fully burdened resources for internal resources that might be getting compensation and benefits. That can be set up to auto-populate your cost of living adjustments, total benefits amounts, so that on top of your salary, you are actually calculating in the other expenses that it takes to employ someone to give you that real picture of what it takes to do resource allocation, right? And again, all of this information can be tied back to any of the budget detail to give you a full picture of what you plan to spend that year for labor and non-labor activities. All right. With that, we have about 7 minutes left. Again, very high level overview, but if you're interested in a deeper dive of the capability, happy to schedule a demo going forward. But with that, I appreciate the time, and I will pause for any questions that the participants on the phone might have.
Yeah, Colin, I've got a few questions here, and feel free to keep submitting questions. First one is, what ServiceNow modules do I need turned on for Proven Optics to work?
So the Proven Optics solution is only dependent on the ServiceNow platform being in place or essentially runtime being stood up. That's how we deploy, right? Is to the native instance or your native ServiceNow instance. Meaning no additional modules are mandatory for us to be installed. Now, of course, if you are running additional modules, we inherit the same data model and platform capability. So having more modules, more data on platform that might be helpful to inject into the budget process for more context is certainly helpful, but again, not mandatory.
Awesome. And then a couple more. Does Proven Optics do full chargeback?
Yes. So today we just looked at the budget clarity module, which really handles the budget planning, actuals reconciliation, and forecasting in an automated approach. Now we have two other modules. One, the cost model, which actually helps you build up to a unit cost and a total cost of ownership that would ultimately inform a chargeback model. We also have a billing and chargeback module that you can actually run a full billing cycle through and push that output to your ERP system to actually go claw back or recover for those dollars. So we do have that full financial management suite that encompasses the full range of what chargeback is.
Great. Okay, and then the last question I have in the chat is, what are the most common ServiceNow modules that are integrated to Proven Optics?
Typically, we see the ITX suites being the most commonly utilized when it comes to a costing perspective. When I say ITX, I mean strategic portfolio management, enterprise architecture, as well as HAM and SAM from an ITAM perspective. So software asset management, hardware asset management. If you think about that, it's really because SPM, you're managing projects, you're managing story points, and labor and resource allocation, right? When it comes to budgeting and doing total cost of ownership of things like applications and services, labor is often one of and projects are often one of the hardest things to allocate across the business, especially related back to an IT capability like an application or a service that your customer might be utilizing. So we really see a lot of tie-ins across the strategic portfolio management application. In addition, the EA module, which is really your application inventory and lifecycle, right? Again, application TCO and app rationalization is on pretty much every CIO's mind going into the start of every year, right? So being able to sync the financials with your application lifecycle and making onboarding, offboarding decisions with finance as part of that is huge, right? No CIO makes any decision without the full picture being price, performance, and risk. Proven Optics brings the price. ServiceNow is very good at operationally managing the performance and risk of applications. And then lastly, that SAM and HAM, which is your hardware and software asset management, license entitlements, how much hardware you have on hand. That's really important from a chargeback perspective, right? A lot of organizations are starting to try to do things like end user device chargeback, right? Or any type of software licensing chargeback. A common one I see is a lot of organizations are charging back for their HRSD license on ServiceNow, right? Again, if you think about operationally managing your utilization, license entitlements, hardware entitlements in HAM and SAM, so really those operational metrics, and then bringing in the Proven Optics modules to manage your projected costs as well as actual costs against those licenses, but not just the license cost, fully burdened cost how much labor, how much platform admin time, um, how much sustainment in operation activities or other areas of cost are included in that rate that you're ultimately charging back for. That's important to make sure you're not losing money on any service. So having that lens into, again, that operational data from a ham and SAM perspective is very important to run a successful chargeback model. So hopefully that answers the broad question of course, any data on platform is helpful, but I think those are the top four that we typically see. Hopefully that's helpful.